The Happy Warrior Podcast. Conservative commentary on the news of the day from a more positive perspective.
Hello everyone, this is the Happy Warrior Podcast. I am your host, Peter Pischke. It's good to be here with you today, otherwise known as Happy Warrior Pete. I have another great episode today. Last week we had the amazing Yellow Flash. We talked about Vic Mañana. I have some great updates about his situation to share later on in the podcast. But first, I have an amazing interview with columnist and podcaster himself, documentarian, video guy, John Ziegler. And we're going to talk about the Jussie Smollett story, what's happened to the sad state of journalism these days. And we're also going to talk about some of his reporting on the Sandusky Joe Paterno stuff. So before I add that bit of audio, I recorded it earlier. Before I add that bit of audio, just a couple things. If you've been living under a rock, Jussie Smollett was this black gay actor that was on the hit show Empire that I've never watched. It looks terrible. But anyhow, he had this giant hoax that happened at the beginning of February, end of January, where he said that at the 2 in the morning, in the middle of the polar vortex in Chicago, while holding a Subway sandwich, two men came up to him wearing MAGA hats. One had a bucket of bleach, the other had a noose, and they said they were going to beat you up or something to that extent. And the media and everyone was petrified to say this thing was ridiculous, okay? Basically, it came out just this week officially that, yes, it was a hoax. Jussie Smollett made it up. He did it so he could boost his career and his profile. And most of the media let him get away with it. Much of the police department was willing to come out publicly and say this. So there are a few people, though, that are willing to do the work that journalists used to do. And one of them is John Ziegler. John Ziegler knows these kind of stories better than anyone. He knows the SJW mob scent better than anyone. He spent years and years working on the story of Sandusky and John Paterno. He had a YouTube documentary, about 30 minutes. It's really good. He also published 2 online books for free on his website about this subject. I mean, there's no one better that knows these things than John Ziegler. He was so cool to come on. Please, if you listen to him, listen to this, you like what you hear, check him out on his 2 podcasts. I'll link to those as well, which is Individual One Podcast and The World According to Zig Podcast. And if you like what you hear, please be sure to let us know on the Twitter, the Facebook, the Minds, wherever our podcast can be found. Thank you. So let's start out. Welcome, everybody. This is the Happy Warrior Podcast. I have a special guest with me today, Mr. John Ziegler. John is a columnist, a podcast and radio guy. He was the one that did the big stories on the Sandusky Paterno stuff. I think you had, was it 2 books and like a 30-minute documentary or something like that on that subject?
Well, I've got a website, probably 3 online books, if you want to call them that, and then a documentary film called The Framing of Joe Paterno, which people can find at YouTube. But I've basically put about 6 years into that story and still going, and it's the most amazing story that's never been properly told, even close to being properly told in the mainstream news media.
Oh yeah, and didn't you get? I was looking through some of your older stuff, your website, and you had this thing like last year where you almost had a full-on front page article in what was it, Newsweek?
Yeah, we had myself and another reporter had been commissioned to do a cover story for Newsweek about the real story involving Penn State. And after working 5 months on it, the day before it was to go to publication, they chickened out because the story is just too explosive. They had approved it. It had been vetted fully. Unfortunately, the biggest problem we had was that the editor in charge who had approved the story had gotten fired on another matter in the meantime. And when he was no longer there, that basically made us incredibly vulnerable to being spiked, and that's what happened.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we could talk. You know, that kind of goes into all the stuff I want to talk to you about. So you've done more of the reporting side, investigating there, especially the Sandusky stuff. But you're also frequently found on Mediaite. You're a columnist. And that's more why I pulled you in, because you're one of the few people in the beginning that was willing to call BS on the Jussie. It's such a strange name, Jussie Smollett story.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, in my Penn State experience, definitely helped me in understanding why the Smollett story was obviously bullcrap. Most stories that sound like bullcrap, when you look at them deeply, almost always are, especially when they don't have a lot of evidence to back them up. And this was a classic example of where the story was outlandish and inherently implausible. Now, granted, implausible things happen all the time, but when they happen, they are accompanied with evidence. and this story, much like in the Penn State situation, had absolutely no evidence where there should have been, and there were a lot of things that were immediately causing concerns. And it really wasn't that difficult for anyone to figure this out. It was just a matter of having the guts to say it and having the platform to say it. So I don't know if I was the first, but I was one of the first, and turns out I was right.
Sorry about that. My dog decided to guard us. She's a tiny thing. She's like 15 pounds, half Shih Tzu, but she thinks she's a Doberman. Okay, sorry. So it was the Sandusky stuff that had your antenna up so that you could recognize the story for what it was, because I mean it was strange. I wasn't really paying attention much to this story when it came out. The Covington story, which had come out in January, that held my attention. But when I saw the Smollett story, I think I did what most people in journalism did on the opinion and the hard reporting side. It was like, wait till more facts are out. I don't know. It's what's the point if you're one of the early guys to catch this? I mean, what's the reward? And I mean, the risk is just too great. So why?
Well, you're 100% right, but that's why no one called BS on it. See, if everyone feels like, well, there's no risk and reward, which, by the way, is true. I mean, having gone up against the conventional wisdom on a lot of these stories, and not just Penn State, but I've done this many times, and I'm almost always right. For instance, Jim Jordan got totally railroaded. Al Franken got totally railroaded. Jim Jordan was able to survive because Trump backed him up. Brett Kavanaugh got totally railroaded. Again, Kavanaugh survived because Trump backed him up. But, I mean, these things are happening quite often. And unfortunately, unless there's a strong political desire, like there was with Jordan and Kavanaugh, to support somebody, unless you have a built-in base of support. See, there was no built-in base of support, especially nationally, in the Penn State stories. No one cared to defend the people who were being accused. There was nothing in it for them. And there's nothing in it for anyone to deconstruct Jussie Smollett, except, see, I think his critical error was when he blamed this on Trump supporters. Because he blamed this on Trump supporters, I think once the story fell apart, that was like gasoline for the opposition, because now they had some skin in the game. You see what I'm saying? Where because Trump supporters now felt invested in disproving the story. I think there was skepticism about the story widespread right from the start, especially among Trump supporters, but no one in the media was going to question it openly, because if you happen to be wrong, then you're a racist and you're a homophobe, and no one wants to be called those names, especially when there's not a lot of reward, even if you happen to be right. I mean, I've been right on a lot of these stories, and it's done me very, very, very little good, if any good. So that's not a healthy media environment to be in.
No, I mean, okay. So what was it like when you first started investigating? I mean, on the journalism side, I have a background in journalism, and I find kind of the actual work of reporting kind of interesting. What was that like, and what was it like trying to talk to local media and police and such?
Well, the Smollett thing was actually pretty simple. I mean, the work I did on Smollett was 1/1,000,000th of the work I've done on Penn State, and I live in California. But what was happening was that I'm pretty good at reading tea leaves, and when the story was implausible from the start, but I really, really started to believe that it was wrong, it was false, because the police in this situation had no incentive, much like the media, to discredit Smollett. I mean, Chicago is a very liberal town, large black population. The head of the Chicago police is black. The mayor is white, but he's a very strong liberal, Obama guy, Rahm Emanuel. I mean, so there's no incentive for the police to be casting dispersions on Jussie Smollett, and yet they were leaking out some information that, while not definitive, certainly sounded to me like there was some dissension within the police department, or at least maybe not even dissension, but there was a belief within the police department that there's something wrong here. Like, for instance, they released the fact that they couldn't find any video surveillance of this attack. Well, ordinarily that wouldn't necessarily be that big of a deal. There's all sorts of possible explanations for that. And especially since, it was early on, I interpreted that as them saying, hold on, we're not finding what we should be finding here if this is true. Because if they had no concerns about the truth of the story, they wouldn't leak that. There would be no reason to leak that. They would just say, well, we just haven't found it yet. And they wouldn't find that to be significant. And then and then the other thing that was big that happened just after that was they announced that Smollett was not handing over his cell phone. Now, in this case where he's a gay celebrity, I can understand why a gay celebrity would be hesitant to hand over their cell phone, theoretically, although the cell phone in this case was supposed to be a large part of the substantiation for what happened, because he was supposedly on the phone with his manager at 2 a.m. when this occurred. So, but again, if the police didn't think that was nefarious, they wouldn't have told us that. And so, I started to get messages from Chicago media members, because I wrote a first article about this, just raising some questions about it, nothing really definitive. And then, there were members of the Chicago media that were basically saying, no one believes this story. The police don't believe this story. They're telling us on background they don't believe this story. And we're just waiting basically for this thing to blow up. And so then I wrote a second article saying that hey, nobody in the media or the police really believe this story, and that got a lot of attention. And again, I don't know if I was really the first. I was maybe one of the more prominent. I don't know, but the reality is that that kind of stuff is important because it creates pressure. Number one, on the people who were lying, and it also creates cover for those, let's say, in the police department or the media, who are suspicious of the story. Because if nobody wants to be the first. That's the key thing you need to understand. No one wants to be the first, because it's like, going into a war. Nobody wants to be the first guy to charge the line, because you're probably going to get shot. And no one likes to get shot. So, once you go out there and then other people feel safer and they feel like they have cover, that they can follow you. So anyway, I ended up writing an article really about 12 hours before the whole thing blew up, saying, when are we going to admit that everyone got duped here? Because it became very obvious once we knew who the brothers were. Right there, we knew the story was false. There's no way possible that those two Nigerian brothers could be involved in this thing, one of whom had worked as an extra on Smollett's television show, and for his story to be true. It's just not possible. But there was still so much hesitancy on the part of the media to call him out on this because of his political correctness protection, the fact that he's gay, that he's black, that he's a celebrity, or somewhat of a celebrity, and the fact that he was claiming to be a hate crime victim. That gives you a lot of protection, and Smollett was counting on that protection, and apparently he was doing it because he wanted to increase his salary at Empire, which is really kind of stunning.
Yeah, he got pretty, in some ways he got it's embarrassingly close to pulling it off.
Maybe. Here's how he got embarrassingly close. If the black or somebody else high up in the police department had decided, you know what, we're just gonna let this one go, then he would have gotten away with it, because the media never would have dismantled the story. But it doesn't feel to me like that was ever really a significant option. It feels to me like the police knew very early on this story was bullcrap, and that they actually created a false sense that they didn't know what was going on, in order to essentially, and I realize with the noose that this is a dangerous metaphor, but they were essentially giving him enough rope where he can hang himself. A real rope, by the way, or figuratively. But he, and he did so in that Good Morning America interview. And it certainly seems like, timing-wise, and this is conjecture on my part, but I don't think it's wild speculation, that it certainly seems as if the Good Morning America interview triggered a heightened aggressiveness by the police, because it's immediately after that everything starts to happen. The brothers are brought in. They flip on Smollett, and then the story disintegrates from there. So I don't know if he got, certainly in the public perception he got close, but it seems to me like the police were onto this very, very early on.
And it is really interesting. It was, because I watched. Was it yes? It was maybe, I think it was Thursday when the police chief in Chicago came out and just slammed on Jussie Smollett. I mean, that was the strongest I think I've seen a person in law enforcement come out that strongly and publicly against one of these kind of hoaxes.
Yeah, although, I had a little bit different reaction to that, because, that police chief was a real part of the reason why the public perception was created that this was real, and the media was so hesitant to call bullcrap on it. I mean, he supported Smollett, whether he believed it or not, I don't know, but he made numerous statements about Smollett, calling him a victim, and basically tapping down speculation that the story was not true. Again, there may have been good reasons why he did that, but he was a big part of the reason why the media was afraid to attack this story. So he's kind of to blame for part of what happened.
Okay,
here.
So do you think this is like his attempts, like, hey, don't look at me. I handled this just right.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to. I don't have enough information to know that.
Okay.
But I mean, what I would love to know is, was he lying at the beginning of the story, or did he get duped too? I don't know, but it certainly seems as if it was one or the other.
All right. Well, let's move on to the journalism side, because this is what bothers me the most. And you said it perfectly. This is another in a long list of false attacks, hoaxes, made up 30-year-old stories from professors that may or may not have been in the same room with them at some random party. I just had this one. I talked last week with some people, and no one's talking about in conservative media or outside, but in the anime world and the nerddom world, there's this voice actor named Vic Manania, and he had this exact same thing. And the guy is a Christian. He's a conservative. He has, I mean, he's like one of those guys that he visits hospital to visit sick fans with cancer. He's Italian. He got too affectionate. Anyhow, loads of people that normally aren't political. This is why I mentioned this story. Normally people who are not political, because people in nerddom, generally speaking, don't want to get involved in politics, took note of this and is pushed back. And I think what's kind of nice about Vic Manana is that the media spin about and the narrative, the all-important narrative, is being pushed back. And that's kind of what we saw here too, was the narrative, man, the journalists were leading the charge on this narrative, like they're the activists, but at the front of the activist army are the generals, and they're the journalists. I mean, GQ had a fantastic. Here it is. GQ's headline on the story was originally, "The racist homophobic attack on Jussie Smollett is far right America's endgame." That's a great.
That's hilarious.
I love that.
What was that from?
GQ.
That's hilarious. Wow, that's the right end game, huh? That's amazing. Wow. Well, and that's the world we're living in now. I mean, because journalism is effectively dead because journalism doesn't make money anymore. That's the problem. I mean, good journalism takes time. It takes resources. It takes skill, and it takes a level of understanding of the world that does not exist within most of the media, especially the fringe elements of the media, both left and right. I really think liberals were incredibly vulnerable to believing this story because they have a misconception of the way the world works. They really think it's possible that two Trump-loving MAGA goons would be walking around at 2 a.m. in the middle of a polar vortex looking for black gay minor celebrities to beat up. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
It is. It is complete. And they didn't even have the right hats. They didn't even have the right MAGA hats. These are like B-list hats.
Well, I don't know that. Again, this whole plan was incredibly poorly thought out. The whole thing was. In fact, it's my understanding, and this is secondhand, but it's my understanding that the police came to the wrong theory of how this happened at first because they couldn't believe that Smollett would be so dumb or such a sociopath to have organized this in such a ridiculous way. And then it turned out as they got more and more facts that, yep, because I originally thought, and I'm partially because I was told the police believed this, that they thought what had happened here was a lover's tiff, that he had a relationship, which he may still have had, with one of the two brothers, and that things had gone wrong, and that the two brothers beat him up, and then he decided to create it into a hate crime afterwards, partially because the seed had been planted by that threatening note that had been sent a few days before. That made sense to me because I'm an anti-conspiracy guy. I don't believe in conspiracies, but because they never work. Well, and this is a perfect example of why they don't work, because people aren't smart enough to pull them off.
That's right.
And so anyway, I think it's interesting to know that the police, while they were right in the big picture, they may have been wrong in how this happened at the beginning of it, and the hats are an example of that. Although my guess is that they just figured, well, this we're going to get caught on surveillance camera. No one's going to be able to tell how good the MAGA hat is, and maybe they didn't want any kind of proof. I don't know. Maybe who knows what they were thinking? Maybe they didn't want any proof that they had purchased MAGA hats. I don't know, but anyway, the whole thing is ridiculous from the beginning, and I'm glad it got blown up. But it would never have been blown up by the news media alone. It had to be done by the police because the media was too afraid of the story.
Oh no, they were carrying water big time. That's what frustrates me the most is the people who used to be the ones that would be that filter, who are theoretically, it hasn't always been perfect, but theoretically would be the ones that have the filters that look into these things, that try to tamp down the moral panic and try to get to the truth, or so they teach you in journalism school.
But I don't know what they teach in journalism school anymore. But it doesn't exist, and it's really important that people understand why it doesn't exist, because it doesn't make money. Everyone always points to Watergate because although I think the Watergate investigation was not nearly as amazing as some people do, but Woodward and Bernstein get all the credit for bringing down Nixon, and that took an incredibly long amount of time, a ridiculous amount of man hours. It probably made money for the Washington Post in the long run, but certainly in the short run it was not. But the Washington Post was making so much money as an entity that it didn't matter. They could use journalism like that as kind of a loss leader, like that it was their moral obligation to do that. Well, but that's not the way it works anymore, because
No.
the business model is broken. So, and one of the reasons why this is so critical, it's not just that there aren't enough journalists, that they don't have enough time. that they don't have enough resources. It's also that they're scared out of their minds for losing their jobs because there's no other job to go to. I mean, the number one thing you need to do really hard journalism, I mean, if you do really hard journalism, you're going to piss off some powerful people. And in this world with the Twitter mob, you might piss off your own audience. And so the first thing you need is job security. Well, there is no job security in journalism anymore.
No, it's I don't have the report in front of me, but it was like 15,000 media jobs were lost over the course of 2018. Something crazy high like that.
Wow, I didn't know it was that high. But I mean, the reality is that journalism is in crisis, and I don't see how it gets anywhere close to back to where it was. I think, in fact, it'll probably only get worse. And on the local level, it's even worse than that. I mean, I really believe that we're going to go through an era now of enormous local corruption because there's no watchdog. I mean, local TV is a joke. Local newspapers have been decimated. At least the national journalists are being kept alive at the Washington Post and the New York Times and some other places, largely because of Donald Trump. I mean, Trump is keeping them in business. Without Donald Trump, and he says this all the time, and I think he's right, although I'm not a fan of Donald Trump at all, but I think he's right that when he leaves, there's going to be another wave of layoffs because he's providing them with content and ratings. And before it, again, certainly in the 70s, during Nixon, this is a totally different situation, and the media didn't give a rat's ass about what stories hit and which ones didn't because they were raking in money. Well, when you're not raking in money, when you're worried about the bottom line, journalism is the first thing that's going to suffer.
No, I'm impressed actually. I remember when I first heard your stuff about Sandusky and Paterno years ago on the Glenn Beck radio program, and at first I was like, "There's no way this is real, no way." And I think everything I've read from what you've done, you make a very, very compelling case that the Sandusky event was a complete and utter farce. But it wasn't something that you made where you don't have a Netflix documentary, and you don't. I mean, no one
will touch it because it's the ultimate story of the media investing everything. I mean, if you think about this, as a gambling table, they went all in. I mean, they went all in. They put all their chips on this, with this narrative, and they did it in a couple of days based upon no information. And then it fed upon itself. And then once you're invested in a narrative, there's no going back. I have related it many times to how 5-year-olds view Santa Claus. I mean there's no changing that in their minds. They're invested in it. I mean, so that's the reality of this, and it's just like that. I mean, it's mythological. I mean, and look, to be clear. I presume that at least most of the stuff we were being told back in November of 2011 when the story broke was true. I didn't go into this going, none of this can be true. I was very skeptical about the Joe Paterno aspect of it, but I accepted the whole Jerry Sandusky thing, and as I got deeper and deeper and deeper, and then interviewed Jerry Sandusky twice in prison for over 6 hours, I'm now to the point 6 years later where it is literally laughable that anyone took any of this even remotely seriously. And that's part of why Sandusky was so vulnerable to a witch hunt, because he didn't think it was possible anyone would believe this. But there was a perfect storm of circumstances that collapsed around him, including the firing of Joe Paterno, and then Penn State becomes invested. And once Penn State becomes invested, see, that's the number one thing people don't understand. People need to understand that Penn State is an academic, state-run institution. It's not their money, okay? It's other people's money. These are, the members of the board weren't all liberal, but it's a liberal academic institution that they think that their job is to embrace their own flaws. So they're going to be the ones who are going to actually get credit, because when they go to their cocktail parties, oh, you guys handled this so well, and because so they actually, there's this perverse incentive for them to take responsibility and guilt for things that they had nothing to do with, which didn't even happen. Then we have this world, and I think this goes back to Smollett and maybe to Brett Kavanaugh, but we live in a world now, and this is so important. We live in a world now where the media still thinks there's a stigma to being a victim. We don't live in that world anymore.
No.
Being a victim is the American dream to a lot of people, especially if you're the right kind of victim. If you're the right kind of victim and that's what Jesse Smollett was banking on. I mean, he wanted to make himself the right kind of victim, where you don't actually get hurt very much. You get a scratch under your eye because it's self-inflicted, but you're the victim of a racist, homophobic hate crime by Trump supporters. Wow, that's the perfect kind of victim to be if you're a liberal actor in Hollywood. Well, in the Sandusky case, it was even worse than that, because these guys all got paid millions of dollars, millions, over $110 million for 36 accusers in the end of it. I can't believe there weren't more than 36. And they all get paid, so they get paid over an average of $3 million each. But get this, if they wanted to, and the vast majority of them elected to do this, they didn't even have to have their names be public. Their own friends and sometimes their own family members don't even know they're Sandusky accusers. They're saying a lot of these guys on Facebook have created totally fake personas to explain why all of a sudden they're rich. Now, of course, I understand. There's a stigma to being a male victim of sex abuse. Okay, yeah, right. Okay, I get that. But if you knew the level that we're going to here, it's completely insane. And by the way, all these guys are heterosexuals. They're all of them heterosexuals. If there had been even one victim that I was aware of, and I'm one of the few people in the world that knows the identities of all 36 of these men. And they were men, not boys. They were men. Many of them were grown men when they made these accusations, none of which were ever made contemporaneously. But if one of them had been openly gay, I would have gone, oh, okay, that makes some sense, because the misperception here, and this all goes back to the Catholic Church scandal. I grew up Catholic, went to Catholic school, had a lot of Catholic priests. The Catholic Church scandal almost entirely was gay priests preying on 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old boys who they either knew to be gay or perceived were going to be gay. And that was them grooming them. And therefore, that's why these boys, put up with this, thinking that this was the act of God or whatever by a priest, without fighting back, without telling anybody, without needing drugs or alcohol. Although there was some of that certainly going on. In the Jerry Sandusky case, you have all heterosexual, mostly teenage boys who were in great shape. They're all athletes, and they're accepting being forced into sex acts without alcohol, without drugs, without payoffs, no non-disclosure agreements. No one even asked Jerry Sandusky for a payoff. There was no pornography, none, zero, zilch. It's impossible. It's impossible. And then you get into his medical records, and it was probably physically impossible for Jerry to do what he did. And if it had happened, people would have recognized a distinguishing characteristic of his genitalia, which no one ever mentioned. So, I mean, there's not a shred of evidence in this case where there should be mountains. I mean, we're basically 10 years into this thing now. It's been investigated by all sorts of agencies and media outlets or whatever, and yet there's not a shred of evidence. And nobody around Jerry believes he's guilty. I'm told even people in prison don't think he's guilty. I mean, it's just, he doesn't fit any of the profile, except for the fact that he is goofy, he's naive, and he's got very strange sense of physical boundaries, which which a lot of people from that generation did. He grew up in a...
The guy I was talking about earlier, Vic Mañana, his problem was he comes from an Italian background. He was always very affectionate with his fans. He gave them hugs. He gave them kisses. I mean, no one at these anime conventions, by the way, are wilting flowers. I mean, there's ladies walking around in body paint. There's all kinds of less than savory stuff. But I mean, that was his problem. Was Vic came off as sort of weird. He was just sort of weird, and so he could seem like an easy target. And I think I've seen that a lot in these cases. These people are just a little bit off, a little bit strange.
Yeah, Jerry is a strange bird. Everyone who knows him will tell you that. But he's strange in the way that one of the things that, and I don't even really like Jerry that much. I think he's incredibly naive, and I think he's made a number of incredibly important mistakes. I mean, he and I think he admires what I've done for him, but it's not like I have any real affection for the guy. I feel badly for him. But the point of this is that I am upset that we're going to live in a world where being weird in the way that Jerry Sandusky is weird is now forbidden or could put you in prison for the rest of your life under the right circumstances, because that's dangerous. I don't want to live in that world.
No, I don't either.
I mean that's a very dangerous world. And I can assure you, as insane as it sounds to most people who have not studied it, and I get ridiculed on a daily basis for my beliefs on this case, I would bet everything I have, without hesitation, that Jerry Sandusky never came close to sexually molesting any boy. Never.
All right. Well, you can find Mr. John Ziegler he's a columnist at Mediaite. I enjoy your columns. You're a very pithy, funny writer. I admire that in you. You can find him at two podcasts, The World According to Zig, which is like free speech broadcast or something like that. And then there's also Individual One podcast, which that podcast is more about Trump and the politics of day-to-day within the Trump political sphere. Do I have that right? I listened to both of them, by the way. I thought
Thank you.
your insights on Individual One podcast, talking about because you talked about media bias on the left, but you also talked about media bias in the conservative media sphere. And I thought your insights you had made about how the conservative media sphere and the conservative philosophy, that part, they're on a similar trajectory, but not quite. And so sometimes, the conservative media will turn towards what best benefits them other than what they say would best benefit the country. I think Fox News being a perfect example of that. Yeah.
It's a business, not a cause. It's a business disguised as a cause, but it's just a business. And sometimes they actually want Democrats in charge. And so they actually do better when Democrats are in charge, and in this case they do better when a Democrat is in charge who calls himself a Republican and who does all sorts of crazy things. And his name is Donald Trump. So yes, it's the Individual One podcast and the World According to Zig podcast, and we'll have new episodes of both of those on Sunday, which is tomorrow.
Fantastic. Well, I will enjoy listening to them. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you taking time to do this.
No problem. Take care.
You too. Well, that was just an awesome interview. Thank you again to John Ziegler for doing that. I think I want to make my next segment a fun one. Let's move from the hard stuff and move to something fun. I'm going to start with this crazy news story out of Lakeville, Minnesota. It's a funny story by itself, but when you add this news report, it is awesome.
Well, some dogs have a tendency to get into a little mischief, but this morning, two pups took that to the next level.
You're just going to wonder how they ended up doing this. Somehow they dialed 911, not once, not twice, but 16 times.
Yeah, you heard that right. This local news report, video is included on the actual report, is about how these two dogs called 911 16 times. And it gets even better. They actually, for this news story, decided to go ahead and put a reporter on the scene. Listen to this.
Fox 9's Sarah Danik is live in Lakeville tonight. And Sarah, you met the two dogs that were behind all of this. So what gives?
Yeah, I did it. Hey, for being so bad, they are so cute. Yeah, little Remy and Bomber were left alone at their home in Lakeville today while their owner had to go to work. But little did anyone know the amount of ruckus they would get into today.
Have a seat.
Don't let these furry faces fool you. These two might just be the baddest boys in the neighborhood. The Papillon and the Hound are the newest partners in crime.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
Yeah, they said it. They said it. The partners in crime. It's so fantastic. Yeah, she is live reporting this in front of the house of the dog story. It's like dead at night, really cold in Minnesota. Oh my gosh, it's so fantastic. It gets better. They interview the cops, and then they decide to interview the actual subjects of the story. I can't believe this. This is so ridiculous.
Yeah, you can see they didn't want to answer our question, so I guess guilty as charged there. Now, the owner tells me that he was just stunned that this all happened. He says he had no idea his dogs could make any kind of calls, let alone to 911. And he said, lesson learned, he will be putting his phone away from now on.
Oh man, I love that. I love it. I didn't make sense of the story either because, like, it's a touchscreen. So that not in the news story when you read it on print, but it actually it's a touchscreen. I thought, how does the dog paw, like, work? Because, you know, you have to have that small electric current that's on the skin. I thought dogs' paws are too rough so that you could get that feel on the phone or tablet. But maybe you can let me know on my social media, on Twitter, Facebook, or mine, the Happy Warrior podcast. Let me know, can dogs do that? Have you played with your dog on a cell phone, and have they called 911? What are you doing to those poor animals, huh? What are you doing to those poor little hounds? Oh, I love that story. I have another one that is almost just as good. It's not happy, though. It's kind of funny, but it's not happy. Woman in mental institution who killed another patient says she is a robot. Yes. This is from the Japan Today. A 23-year-old woman was transferred from one mental institution to another this week after having killed a patient, a woman in her 80s, one day after arriving at a facility in Ome, Tokyo. She was transferred to the hospital on Monday, admitted to killing the woman on Tuesday, but has been rambling. She was quoted as saying, quote, "I am a robot, and when I am switched on, I move without any control over my actions." Oh, that's really sad. It's really sad. But it gave me an excuse to play a little bit of Futurama audio.
I'm not crazy. Don't call me crazy. I'm just not user-friendly.
I'm not a robot! I'm not a robot!
Okay, so there you go. There you go. That was Roberto and Fry from Futurama. That's a fun episode where Fry believes he's a robot. He has to be put into an institution, and he meets Roberto. And Roberto is one of the best characters on that show by far. Oh, man. I love Futurama. That is just a great go-to show. I need to watch it again. It's been a couple months. You know what's really weird is all these... So there's all of these news stories been going around about the clothing that's being pulled. And left and right, we have all these clothing that's being pulled. The most recently one was another designer. This is from Daily Wire. How does this keep happening? Another designer pulls offensive clothing item. And I'll just read the byline. Another fashion brand has pulled an item over concerns about what it is depicting, though this time it wasn't due to blackface. And this one is so weird. They're saying that this showcases a hoodie with a noose. And I'm looking at the picture now. Oh, yeah, no, it does. It has a little tiny noose. I thought it was that looked like a hijab inside of a fur coat that would get it. But it's also, there is a little noose. That's terrible. But this isn't the only one. Just before that, Katy Perry, this is on the 12th of February, got in trouble for these shoes that were being sold at, I think, Walmart and Target. And they were saying that this, too, was blackface. They said this looks like the Rue Face slip-on loafers or the Aura Face block heel sandal. And you look at it, and the one on the left in particular, that's black and has... Yeah, I do see kind of the blackface. It looks like the old Samba boy figurine that came out of Japan, and they would paint them in this style where they put... where the blackface is like really big red lips and... Anyhow, no, it really does look like that. I wonder how people thought that was a good idea. But it's not the only one. Before that, Gucci, the fashion house of legend, got in trouble because they had to pull this turtleneck shirt because people are saying this could be blackface. And oh, look, it does look like blackface. I take it back. That one also looks like blackface. It's pretty ugly too. I don't know why you want to wear any of these. They're all weird. They're like weird as can be fashion statements. But you know what was really weird? The weirdest one I have, the weirdest two I have is in Folsom Lake College, someone reported to the police department a poster of a cartoon frog. And this caused a fiasco, a feeding frenzy by the SJW mob at Folsom Lake College over a poster of Pepe the Frog. And of course, Pepe is an alt-right figure symbol. You know, it's complicated. He's not as bad as they say, but he doesn't necessarily represent a lot of good stuff either. But it's not worth putting the school on heightened alert for signs that this may be part of a larger trend or pattern, which is, of course, the phrase that the email the school faculty said. Oh my gosh. People were saying that this picture, the Pepe, the smirking frog, was a fascist dog whistle. Fascist dog whistle. Yep. So there you go. And you know, in the same world where there's racist clothing, in the same world where President Trump, former TV celebrity, is present, in the same world where dogs call 911 16 times, pleading for help. Please help us. Please help us, Shelley. Well, in this crazy world, and I mentioned this in my interview with Ziegler, that the Vic Mañana narrative, I think, is starting to turn. After last week's excellent interview with Yellow Flash, again, thank you to Yellow Flash for that. Be sure to check out his videos at Yellow Flash 2 on YouTube. Vic Mañana came out. I'll just read the statement. He says, "Words cannot express the depth of my gratitude for all the kindness and support that has been shown to me over the last few weeks. I had hoped that my apologies and acknowledgments, both in public and private, would be received. But I have now very reluctantly retained a law firm as my last and only recourse attempt to salvage my reputation and my 20-year career in this industry. A friend expressed a desire to set up a GoFundMe for legal expenses. I approved his kind offer and am so grateful, but I am not managing it, nor will I personally receive any of it. Any surplus will go to the Salvation Army, Dallas Domestic Violence and Abuse Shelters. I hold no malice towards anyone. I just love my work and the fans sincerely wish to continue." And so, yeah, Vic is going to defend his name and his reputation in court. Good for him. I'm glad he's standing up and pushing back against this nonsense. You know, even if he did the things they say you do, the place where you deal with that is in law enforcement, it's in the court. And that we're just going to destroy people's reputations with no recourse, with no rule of law, with no ability to, defend yourself. It's just wrong. Okay, that's what they did at the Salem witch trials. Okay, that's what happens when you have a moral panic atmosphere and you abandon the rule of law. There's some more hit pieces that came out about him. They just nothing new. A report said that the previous investigation at Funimation had found that was inconclusive. It's not clear if that was the same one that they based on firing him. I don't know. But anyhow, that is good news for Vic Mañana. I hope it works out for the guy. I'm so tired of these SJW mob character assassination takedowns. I really am. I'm just beat and tired. I'm just so dead tired of it. And I'm glad we got to talk to John Ziegler about it, and I'm glad things are turning around for Mr. Mañana. All right, just a quick break, and then I'm going to talk about what is healthcare like in the United States these days. That and more here on the Happy Warrior Podcast. I'm back. I want to spend this next segment talking about a subject near and dear to me, and that is healthcare. And no, I am not going to harp on the opioid epidemic and its impact on people like me, Robert. Don't worry about that. I've harped on that a few too many times. I think people get tired of hearing it first. So quickly, an update. I've talked a lot about asking you guys to pray for me a couple times the last few podcasts. I appreciate those prayers and well wishes. I need them. I have a new pain doc that I'm now working with, and my church, my local church, is helping to cover for it, and I'm very grateful to them for doing that, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to see her. And that is sort of working out slowly. But it is getting better. It is hopeful, I think, and I'm excited to hopefully get a better handle on my pain and maybe eke out some more life into me. So what do I want to talk about healthcare? Well, I was talking with my brother James, and he is a medical student. He are about to be. He wants to go to medical school, and we're talking about what is the future like for someone like him if they want to enter healthcare. What does that look like? I think I see this a lot with me when I think about how my relationship with doctors has changed over the last year. So I'll tell you this story. So this week I was to meet with my doctor. I'll call her Dr. C because I don't want to give her name out just in case. And Dr. C was kind enough to bring me in. She was prescribing me tramadol, and they have normal painkillers for that, so like Tylenol, ibuprofen. It was my hope when I see her that she might prescribe something, more, and that maybe we could get me started on physical therapy, because we had talked about both those things previously. However, I waited over an hour there in the waiting room. I get in, the meeting's like 5 minutes, and I don't say or bring up any of that. I'm like frozen. I don't know why. It's hard. I was feeling sick that day. That must be part of it. But I was like frozen. I could not speak. I could not talk. I could not express my needs, my concerns, my worries. And then it was done, and I felt horrible because I have to live with this pain. I thought that I'd have to wait another month to have another opportunity to ask Dr. Cho, perhaps, just perhaps, we could prescribe more pain medicine or something that would be more effective in treating my pain. I don't know if that's oxycodone or narcotic. I don't know. I'm just saying I need something more than what I'm doing now, because I can't live another year. It's hard to think that I could even live another month in the constant state of pain every single day that I live in. Creating this podcast, by the way, is a miracle. It really is, because I barely am able to get the effort out to do it. I do care about it. I do care about my audience and my listeners, and I'm grateful to you guys to listen. So why am I so burnt out? Well, I'm burnt out because my relationship with doctors has become so estranged. It used to be when I was a kid growing up, and it was only until a few years ago, that I felt that doctors had my best interests at their heart. My main practitioner, I'll call him Dr. D, was amazing. He was my family doctor for 20 years. Very kind man, very patient, amazing guy, amazing doctor. He took me seriously and took care of my needs. But I turned 26. I had to choose between two of the local health insurance providers, and because our two big hospitals here in my hometown don't get along, you only get insurance for one or the other. You don't get both. And so I chose option A instead of option S. And so that meant I lost this doctor. Big mistake. Well, it wouldn't matter too much, because not even a year after this, I had no way to pay for the health insurance, and I had to go to the free clinic. Now, the free clinics, you see, in my home state of South Dakota, this is true of everywhere in the United States. It's impossible to get on Social Security disability. And in South Dakota in particular, it is impossible if you are a single adult to get on Medicaid. Now, every doctor and person around thinks, oh, well, if you get sick and you can't afford it, then you can get on Medicaid, right? Well, not so, because only certain states pass the expansion. And even with the expansion, these programs are going heavily in debt, and they can't afford to put up lots and lots of people like me. And so what happens in South Dakota is we have to go to these free clinics. And I'm grateful to the free clinics. I'm grateful to the staff there. Just, it hasn't always been the best experience. And, my relationship and dealing with all this healthcare, and because of the opioid epidemic, people are so scared to treat people with chronic pain, and they're scared to actually treat them with stuff that works instead of happy thoughts and exercise. Happy thoughts and exercise help, but they're no cure, and they don't do a lot to tamp down pain. sorry, you just can't get around that. And so it has just made me so scared to talk to doctors. I am so scared to talk to doctors now. I honestly am scared. I feel like I've been backstabbed so many times by people in the medical field, be it doctors, be it the receptionists. I'm just like, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want them to, one, think I'm a drug seeker and burn and just not want to have anything to do with me. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to be a burden on anyone. I always try to be polite and nice and kind to be at my best. People like me, we do need chronic pain treatment like a diabetic needs insulin, like a person that is suicidal, depressive, needs antidepressants. We need painkillers that much. And I know for those that haven't lived in chronic pain, they just don't understand what that's like. Well, imagine if you broke your leg. Every single day you broke it again. And you couldn't sleep, you couldn't eat, you couldn't do anything because all the time you had broken leg pain. And that's what chronic pain is like. It is awful. It spreads. It affects your memory and your ability, and it affects your functioning, and affects your moods. I have something with it called chronic pain syndrome, where it makes it hard to think, and you're easily irritable. I mean, I'm barely holding on by my fingertips to life at this point. I know that's a little scary to say to some of my relatives who love me, but I mean, I'm really struggling. And it's not that I'm suicidal. I'm not. It's that I'm either going to stroke out or I'm going to have a heart attack. And if I don't get treatment, one of the two is going to happen, or both. Because your body can only take living under that kind of duress so long without something giving. So why are doctors, so that was more about the patient side, but why are doctors so burnt out? Why is it that doctors feel burnt out? Well, largely it's because of the Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. Before Obamacare, there was lots of regulation, a lot of big business deals with government, and it made healthcare expensive. I mean, we do have the best quality healthcare, and that does cost money. But on top of that was all these regulations. You know, before Obamacare, it was like 50% of all healthcare was paid using Medicaid and Medicare, and they don't pay very much. And so to fix that in the private market, they have to charge so much more. And it just made healthcare very expensive. Well, Obamacare doubled down on all those. They tripled down on all that. And they increased the regulations to no end. In fact, doctors are now spending more time in regulations and bureaucracy than they are in treating the patient. Think about this next time you see your doctor. How much time do you spend in the waiting room? And after that nurse, you're just sitting there for the doctor to come. And how much time do you actually spend with the doctor? And people have figured it out. I have this study here. It was from last December, medical economics, and he says that when they asked physicians, they said 79% of doctors said the top challenge they had was paperwork and administrative burdens. These doctors are spending on average 45 minutes or more on per patient. They're spending more time on paperwork and bureaucracy than they are dealing with patients. And, you know, we are asking doctors to do more and more. They're supposed to know if your family has alcohol. They're supposed to know if someone in your family is suicidal. They're supposed to know if you have a gun in the house. I mean, they have to worry about your weight. I mean, they have to deal with a lot of things that maybe tangentially have to do with your health care, but they don't get as much time and energy they get to dedicate to treating the actual symptoms and actual health problems. There's kind of this effect beforehand. It was called the vanishing patient effect, where because we look inside with all our tests inside the patient, we sometimes lose track of treating the person that resides in that body. But when this is that squared to a billion. I mean, it really is awful. It is awful. That's the main takeaway from the medical economics. They said, some ways around that. So maybe if patients play more with cash, maybe healthcare technology will open that up. But by large and far, the biggest problem right now, besides the expense for the doctors, is just all the bureaucracy. And I take this back to opioids. Look, if you're a doctor right now and you prescribe opioids, if your opioid prescribing is average or over average, you could be then the tall nail that gets hit by the hammer, as they like to say in Japan. And you don't want to be that guy. So everyone is reducing the amount of people they want to prescribe to pain care. My doctor told me, he says, I only have 2 patients on opioids and I don't want to prescribe them anymore. And I don't blame her. This is not the new one, the old one. I don't blame her for feeling this way. She has to keep her job and her license, okay? And she is interested in the best thing in the care. And the CDC 2016 guidelines were so awful and have such a bad effect. And the law enforcement is pushing so heavily. The media is constantly talking about the evils of opioids, and only now just rarely saying that there are people that actually need these suckers sometimes. And so law enforcement is, it's a lot easier to take out a doctor who prescribes and patients. It's the low-hanging fruit. It's much harder to actually catch people buying drugs illegally. And so they just go after the low-hanging fruit. I mean, there's more to it. There's PROP. There's economic incentives to go after people who need opioids and chronic pain treatment. There's a lot more to it. But it's just hard to be a doctor, okay? If you're spending most of your time in paperwork, and you have people breathing down your neck. Before Obamacare, doctors were still scared to death being sued. In the U.S. in particular, we don't have something called loser pays. That almost every other nation in the world has something called loser pays, which means if you're in a civil suit and the person who loses, they pay for the legal costs. Well, we don't have that in the U.S. And that takes away the incentive that someone would have to not wrongly take someone to suit. In the U.S., we look at when something medical goes wrong, we often look at as a payday. Oh, we're going to take the guy to task and make a couple 10 grand. It's awful. It's awful. And it just makes it so hard to be a doctor. Every doctor in the U.S. is required to have huge amounts of malpractice insurance. And it's not that most of them are bad doctors. It's just that eventually you're going to screw something up or something's going to go wrong or you're going to get blamed and you're going to have to use this. And the hospitals have to pay loads and loads of money for that, which of course only adds to the expense of healthcare. At the same time, we have all this stuff. People are saying we need to go to Medicare for all. And when they say Medicare, they really mean Medicaid. And they really mean is something what happens to our poor veterans that have to go to the VA. And what happened is, when this will happen, if we go to any more government health care, we will be stuck with rationing. Now, Sarah Palin was a little flamboyant when she said death panels, but this is what happens every single time, is that there's only so much money in the pot. And now we have to cover everyone's health care. Well, you have to choose who gets what and how much. And you are going to prioritize the healthy who will live longer over the ones that might not. You're going to also prioritize a side effect is that you're going to prioritize the ones that can work. So disabled people, elderly people, sick people are always the first ones to lose when healthcare becomes rationed. Okay, it's just what happens. Look, they could put the money into me, knowing I probably will never actually work and add money to the coffers. Or they could put to the next guy who might live another 20 years and put money onto the taxpayer rolls. Okay, what would you do? It's scary because this is how we get stuff like bioethicists saying that we need to push eugenic engineering. And they're looking at this from a cold, rational perspective. I think it's immoral, but they're looking at it from a cold, rational perspective. This is done throughout Europe and in Canada. UK has this problem too. And it's just something that happens. Now, it's interesting because there are people now saying we need to push eugenics for another reason besides rationing. We need to push eugenics again for bioengineering. The very fascinating article that I read from National Review where it talks about that, using gene editing for the enhancement of people. One of the side effects of those twin girls that the guy did the editing on in China using, what was it called now? Splicer? Whatever it's called. Was that it may have increased their intelligence because the certain gene that they turned off is shown in studies with mice that increases intelligence. And we're going to see more of this. I know that sounds like science fiction. It's one of my favorite movies, by the way. What is that, Gattaca? Yeah, Gattaca. Fantastic movie. That's the theme of it. And we're gonna head there. We're going to revive the old progressive Nazi dream. Good old eugenics. Okay? It could be a scary place. The people who want this socialized utopia don't understand the history of these things. And they don't understand that the people that they want these programs to help, most of all, those are the ones that lose out. Who were the first losers when Obamacare passed? Who do you think the biggest losers were? It was people like me. It was people like me because healthcare became too expensive for our families to pay for it, for charities to pay for it. And we didn't make enough money. You have to make $15,000 a year to be able to get the earned tax income credit for healthcare. We were the first people to lose out. We lost our doctors. We lost our treatment plans. My brother James was talking about that one of the big issues right now they're talking about in medicine when he go to these interviews in medical schools, they'll worry about continuity of care. He says because of Obamacare, they don't say the Obamacare part, but he says our healthcare system only works when they have a doctor that's willing to be a patient advocate and come up to bat. When you've known a doctor for a decade and they say, no, you don't understand. Peter's a good guy. He's a Mormon. He's LDS. He never drinks. He never smokes. He never does illegal drugs. He takes good care of his mom and his siblings. He's a good guy. I know Peter. He's a quality guy. When you don't have that guy coming up to bat and willing to put their job on the line, then you can just get railroaded and you can just get stampeded on and just thrown under the proverbial medical bus. Because it's easy to blow them off when the doctor's not there coming up to bat. And the problem with Obamacare was it pushed us away from our doctors because health insurance is too expensive. I lost it. I couldn't keep my doctor. So we are really in a messy place right now in the United States when it comes to our health care. We really are. And I think I think Medicare, Medicaid for all is probably going to happen. It is going to be awful. It's going to set us back. We're probably, if the AI technology develops as we're saying, we'll probably put the AI more in charge of that. And I don't know if that'll be a good thing or a bad thing. I think things like legalized assisted suicide is going to continue to grow. There was that really creepy story I shared with you guys in Oregon where this woman, Barbara Wagner, was denied life-extending chemotherapy on Medicaid, but they at the same time offered payment for assisted suicide. I mean, we're set for a big problem. I think one last thing is these people don't know that when they put us in this big money pot and they want the government to be the central planner, this does two more things I think must be shown. Number one, there are no outs. Okay, if a hospital screws you, if the health insurance screws you, you can take them to court. You can go to the government. You have an alternative. Not that it's necessarily effective or great, but you do have an alternative. When the government is the only game in town, there's no one you can go to. Which, by the way, I think is ridiculous to push preschool for all. Oh, we want to put the same people that run the DMV to be in charge of our kids. The same people that, lost $1 billion out of nowhere. He was just on the train woman and the next man was gone. You want to put the same people that can't put together a government website, even still today, and it's been, 8 years since healthcare.gov came out? I mean, this is ridiculous. You don't want to trust these people with your dog, let alone your little children. But central planning is now back in vogue. We love it. It's the compassionate answer. Even though the least compassionate governments in the world history, especially in the last 150 years, have all been central planning states. Soviet Union, China, killed over 100 million people. A mix of incompetence and purposely killing them, but they killed them. That is not compassionate. So where do I want to end this? I want to say this. If you're a person like me, you're disabled, give your doctors a break. Try to understand where they're coming from. They have a lot on their plate. If you're someone that is hearing these arguments about healthcare, you have got to step in and say that no, government-run healthcare is not the compassionate answer. It is not the moral answer. It is the cruel answer. I have a story I could have shared with you about this lady. She was in Britain. She went in for leg pain. 6 months later, they lost her teeth and she still had the leg pain. And do you think her life was better? Do you think President Obama, when he told that woman that her 100-year-old grandmother would be better off, instead of getting a heart transplant, she would be better off just getting a pain pill? Is that compassion? Is that what righteous, moral goodness looks like? No, of course not. Of course not. The idea that somehow the Soviet Union, Venezuela, China, take your pick. It's a great list of communist and socialist governments. That they were somehow so kindly to those who are disabled and sickly is a farce. There's nothing to justify that. Nothing at all. And so please, the next time you are told that socialist medicine is the kind and compassionate answer, it's the right and moral answer, tell them they are dead wrong. That is the exact opposite. People like myself are the first ones to lose out when we become a state-run government healthcare. And you should also point this a little nice thing is the United States, by the way, is the out for the rest of the world. Okay, when their governments can't get healthcare in their countries, they come down here. I mean, Canada and the UK sends hundreds of thousands of people every year for medical care to the United States. So we get rid of that. We're not doing the world any favors either. You know, I feel like that is a good place to cut off for this week. I just kind of like to feel these out. Normally I like to go for the 90, but I think this is a good place to cut us off. Thank you for listening to this episode today of the Happy Warrior Podcast. I'm Happy Warrior Pete. Please check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Minds.com. Facebook is Happy Warrior Pete. Twitter is Happy Warrior P. I want to say Minds is Happy Warrior P as well. But anyhow, please check us out on the social. Be sure to plug us away. Share us with all your friends. Help this thing to grow. Maybe by the success of work in journalism and this podcast, perhaps one day I will be able to make a living and not have to live at the charity of my family and church. Thank you to everyone that listened. Thank you to John Ziegler for coming on. He is amazing. Thank you to my producer, Robert Mehling. God bless you. God bless the troops who sacrificed blood, sweat, and tears for our sacred liberties and our natural law. Well, you guys have been great. I really appreciate you spending the time here with me today. Until next time, good night, America.
Thank you for listening. The Happy Warrior Podcast, hosted by Peter Vaughn Pischke, produced by Robert Mehling, a production of the Sioux Empire Podcast Network. Learn more at happy-warrior.net.
A production of the SiouxEmpire.com.